The being of consciousness is all-inclusive plenitude. Then where else can exist anything that is not consciousness? Where could that consciousness be found if searched for by asking, what is that one consciousness that alone exists, as though it was something existing externally? Hello, welcome back to Arivu, the poem written by Sri Narayana Guru, which translated means consciousness, knowledge. As I sat down just now to record this episode, I realised that I'd not shared with you the reason why I chose this poem over all others. I chose it because I was moved so much that it brought unity within myself, and that is something that I'd not felt from any other source. I've read widely and searched for answers everywhere, but I'm no scholar of average intelligence. I have no specialism in this field, and I'm sure most probably 99% of the population would be able to give you more theoretical information than I will be able to do. So consider me a novice, but I have been moved by this poem and felt an urgency to share with as many people as possible the joy and the meaning of this poem. You see, I'm a hybrid, a mix, meaning that my core and my umbilical cord is South Indian, and my heart and mind is as a Londoner. I was born in Singapore and spent a period of 2 years in India and then moved to London at the age of 7. So you see why I'm a mix of ideas and thoughts, and above all I'm a human, and that is what is profound in this poem called Arivu. It brought an end to the long-standing divisions between East and West, which is even more profound during these challenging times of COVID-19. It brought a completeness within myself, and I knew that I had to share this with you, and the podcast grew organically. Narayana Guru attained enlightenment, and he saw the oneness in everything. And there is similarity between Socrates, the Greek philosopher from whom all Western philosophy takes root. This poem, Arivu, knowledge, underpins that there is only one pure consciousness, and everything imaginable and unimaginable comes out of and within this one source. Socrates also believed in the good of man, and that happiness that we all seek comes out of one, and that if a man is immoral, it is out of ignorance. No matter what it is or who it is, when this one consciousness is known, there is no other way to be than to work for the benefit of all. This poem is very much the bringing together of humanity, and it matters not whether you are of different heritage, faith, colour, race, gender, caste, religion, of Eastern belief or Western thought. All are unified under this one consciousness, which underpins man's search for happiness and meaning of life. We cannot hurt each other without hurting ourselves, and happiness is only real when the truth of consciousness, the one reality, is known. So this is very much a personal journey of fusion, and these podcasts have evolved as my understanding grew and clarity started to surface. By the end of the journey, I felt a great sense of contentment. It is nearing Christmas in London, and I snatch a few minutes over a cup of coffee, watching the Christmas tree lights go on and off, feeling a wonderment of the moment. I take note of the many numbers of small lights flashing, and only one source, one switch. The lights represent the many, the differences, the variations, and the individuality, whether as countries, religion, and so forth. But recognizing that the one consciousness in this analogy, being the switch and the light, as well as the tree, and all of it, is the consciousness expressing itself. The consciousness must create, and the potential energy within it has to go on creating as many and varied and the joy is in the folding and the unfolding, and the differences are but superficial, and the truth being that we are the one consciousness. Knowing that we are one and the same, and it is this knowledge, Arivu, which cannot be taught, but only to be experienced through one's own discovery, that removes anxiety and fear. Life is a play, so hop on and take a ride. And when we come to experience this world and the universe beyond an infinity is of one source, a Maya, then how can we take life seriously? And who can live without compassion towards others? I hope you enjoy this amazing verse 4 of Arivu, consciousness, knowledge, along with the wonderful explanations given by Guru Muni Prasad in his book of shorter philosophical poems of Narayana Guru. The being of consciousness is all-inclusive plenitude. Then where else can exist anything that is not consciousness? Where could that consciousness be found if searched for by asking, what is that one consciousness that alone exists, as though it was something existing externally? Now I'm going to read the expansion of this verse. Atma, unconditioned consciousness, is essential content that shiningly manifests as the one who knows as well as the object known, alone has all-pervading existence. How can what we think of as the non-self, an Atma, then ever exist other than in Atma? The non-self, therefore, has no existence of its own. What is it that we call Atma or consciousness thus? Where does it exist? Such inquiries do not take us anywhere near a definite answer, for it is the very same Atma that makes the inquiry, assuming the form of the inquirer. Atma, thus, is not something that we can search for and find out. Now moving on to the fuller explanation given. That what abides in the being of everything known is none other than consciousness, as shown in verse 1. Verse 2 made it clear that the known object does not exist if no consciousness exists. It was thus established by the method of agreement and difference that what appears as the known is nothing other than the consciousness. It is with the aid of certain valid means known as pramanas that we arrive at certainty with regard to anything. But consciousness remaining conscious of itself is not some knowledge gained by any such means. It simply is the self-awareness of consciousness. It requires nothing external as an aid. The self-awareness of consciousness is also thus consciousness in essence. That means the underlying substance in both the object of knowledge and the subject of knowledge is one unconditioned consciousness alone. That consciousness is the one reality that has all-pervading existence, and it can never be searched for and found out as if it is something other. This is one argument made in this verse. Consciousness is the one substance that pervades everywhere, abiding as the being of everything apparent. That means consciousness alone has all-inclusive plenitude. Then where else can what we think of as non-self or non-consciousness exist? In other words, if you think that something other than consciousness exists, then where does it exist? Is it not one consciousness alone wherein all such can exist? What exists in the being of consciousness necessarily has to be consciousness in essential content. That means if it was something that could be thought of as other than the self or consciousness does supposedly exist, that existence has necessarily to be in consciousness as a functional mode of consciousness. In short, what we usually count as non-consciousness does not exist outside the being of consciousness. We have the sense that our knowledge is very limited. We sense this by taking into account only the amplitude of information collected so far in our memory. The plenitude of consciousness discussed here may also be perceived from the limited perspective. Really, the amplitude of consciousness, even in its individuated aspect, is unthinkable. How then can the amplitude of the unconditioned consciousness be thinkable? Suppose my knowledge has a limit of its own. It could well be compared to a circle. Then what I think of my consciousness is that its range is within the bounds of that circle. Then whatever is outside those bounds cannot be knowledge. But it remains a fact that I knowing that what is beyond the bounds of that circle is not knowledge is also knowledge. That means what is not knowledge, what is considered beyond the bounds of knowledge, also is within the functional amplitude of consciousness. Thus, even our individuated consciousness, in its functional range, is of such a boundless extensiveness as to include within it what is known as what is not known. Then what about the universal consciousness, let alone then the case of the non-dual or absolute consciousness? Our final goal is knowing the all-underlying reality, and that reality, as we've already seen, is unconditioned consciousness in essence. The questions we ask ourselves when searching for something would be as follows. What is the object we're in search of? Of what kind is it? How is it to be known? Where can we find it? Answering such questions really constitutes the core of our search. Here, the reality we're in search of is the consciousness that fills everywhere. Being so, how would it be possible to know it as though it were located somewhere? It, in other words, should not be searched for as an object that could be found at any particular location. Being the substance that fills everywhere, it should be the one that fills the being of the knower also. That means the object we're in search of itself functions as the knower or as the knowing mind. The knower or the knowing mind, in order to know the ultimate reality, therefore does not have to search for it anywhere outside, but has only to turn to it himself or herself, or the mind turn to itself, and directly perceive it as the substance in the being of himself, herself, or itself. We usually gain a definite knowledge of anything with the help of certain pramanas, or valid means of knowledge, and for this reason, due consideration to pramanas forms an important section in all the Indian schools of philosophy. The nearest equivalent to it in Western philosophy is epistemology, where you have pratyaksha, which is known as perception, anumana, inference, upamana, which is comparison, arthapati, which is presumption, anupalapati, non-perception, and sabda or sruti or agama, scriptural evidence, are the pramanas acceptable to Vedantins. Some schools do not admit all these, whereas some others add atyata, customary legends, and smriti, memory, also to the list. Yet all these pramanas apply only in the context of someone knowing something else. In the context of the knower knowing oneself, on the other hand, the help of all such pramanas is of no avail, and one's attention becomes interiorized towards oneself. This culminates in one experiencing oneself, and so becoming lost in the lustrous oneness of the knower and the known. As the Guru puts it himself in his Atmabhadesha Sadhagam, verse 14, this experience is comparable to a lamp that shines incinerating the threefold factors of knowledge, the knower, the known, and the event of knowing. The same brightness would then be convincingly felt to be the reality we are in search of. No amount of meandering in this world in search of it would help us arrive at this conviction. That brings us to the end of verse 4. Thank you for listening, and once again, I really hope you enjoyed this verse, and I'll be here again for verse 5. Look forward to meeting you then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.